All right. Welcome to another episode of the Consistency Corner podcast. I'm super excited to have Kris Jones here today to number one, nerd out with me on StoryBrand because she's a StoryBrand certified guide, but to talk about the signature collaborative process that she uses when it comes to writing sales copy for your website. And we're going to get into sales pages and home pages and what sales copy really is, but she can create copy that sells in 2.5 hours flat with her signature collaborative process, which is amazing. I mean, if you guys have ever sat down and tried to write copy, you realize like it takes a long time. And I was actually talking to a friend earlier today about time management. We were talking about small business owners and all the hats that they have to wear and all the things on our to-do list and how often we put something on our to-do list and we think it's going to take 15 minutes. And it's really like a 3-hour project, or you might even estimate that it's a 3-hour project and it's really a 10-hour project. So I'm really excited to get into how you do this in such a short amount of time and give people that time back while still getting results. So Kris is a copywriter and, like I said, a certified StoryBrand designer, and she's worked with brands like Nike and Adidas and is extremely passionate about helping women-owned small business owners, coaches, and service providers get website copy that sells so that they can actually multiply their revenue. And she has had some incredible transformations for her clients, including increasing revenue by 300%, record-breaking lead calls and clients booking, and scaling from 30K months to 300K months, which that sounds amazing. And then charging 6 times more for the same service by creating that brand value. So Kris, thank you so much for being here today. I'm excited to have you on the show. Welcome to the Consistency Corner.
Thank you, Ruthie. I am thrilled to be here.
Yeah. And so we connected originally, I think, inside of Holly's mastermind. You spoke in Holly Haynes's mastermind, which I'm a part of. And you and I connected through your podcast agent, some different people that we were on. So we're kind of in the same circle. And I'm really excited to dive into this today. But before we get in, can you share a little bit more about your business journey and how you got to where you are today and kind of what you do for your clients today?
Yeah, absolutely. I have been at this a little over 20 years, which is just mind blowing to me, but it goes to show you that like I love my work and I thankfully figured out like what I love to do early on in life. But it was definitely a journey into becoming self-employed. I spent many years like working in-house at Nike and Adidas, and I worked in some agencies as well. And I think that was important for me to really, learn the craft. But entrepreneurship has always been part of my soul. So kind of taking that leap to becoming self-employed felt pretty effortless for me. It was also at a time in my life that I just didn't have a lot of overhead. I didn't have children. I just could really explore this without a lot of risk. And that was back in the day when, I would say that I've always been a visual storyteller. That's kind of my first love. That's how I played as a kid. And that's what I ended up doing, in my early 20s. A lot of branding work, a lot of design work. And that eventually led to me being self-employed and doing more web design work. But as time went on and the landscape of the internet changed, it became really clear to me that, the beautiful websites that I was creating weren't as effective as they had been.
Mm-hmm.
And this is back in the day when like, if you had a beautiful website, that's all you needed to really thrive as a business. And that changed. And the reality was even my own website wasn't bringing in the clients that I needed on a consistent basis. I was pretty much relying solely on referrals. And so I had a client come to me. Her name was Elise, and she had a publishing background and had a really great business idea and hired me to create a website for her. And she was comfortable with the copywriting process. So she was going to tackle that and then bring that to me. And then I was going to bring it to life with really beautiful design. And we set a deadline for the kickoff of the project. And she came to me, she called me, I think it was the day before. And she's like, I don't know what's going on. I consider myself a great writer. I cannot write this website copy. Like it feels impossible. I'm stuck. I keep spinning round and round and round, and nothing feels like it's good enough. And so we brainstormed a bunch of things like, okay, you could hire a copywriter. You could ask some of your old clients, for their feedback. You can, run it by your cousin who used to be in advertising. And she tried all the things. I mean, she hired multiple copywriters, and none of it was working, because ultimately, what I learned from that is that you really can't outsource your own voice.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do, it usually just doesn't feel quite right. And then you end up kind of feeling cringy when you're sending somebody to your website, because it doesn't feel really aligned and authentic to you. And so, thanks to Elise, I just went on a quest, on a mission to never let this happen again. And I flew across the country for deep dive workshops. I read books. I ended up connecting with Donald Miller and got to study under him and further my learning, and eventually became a certified StoryBrand guide. I was one of the very first. It was before Building a StoryBrand, the book, even came out. And after that, after I went through that journey, I, of course, started applying this approach of storytelling. Like, I essentially felt like I could now create a beautiful visual story, but I could marry it with a really powerful written story. And that was that kind of secret 1-2 punch that was needed in order for major changes to happen for my clients. And so shortly thereafter, like immediately when I started applying the things that I had learned, I was getting calls, like you mentioned, like, oh my gosh, I'm charging 6 times more for the exact same service. I was on the verge of burnout, and now my business is thriving. And like this month, we broke our record for amount of lead calls booked. It was just shocking how like relatively simple that combination of visual story and written story, when you combine them, how powerful that is, and how few people are actually really doing that on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Too often people invest in design or they invest in copy, but they don't really invest in both. And so the same thing, of course, I applied it to my own business, and the same thing happened. I was getting booked out. The fun thing that was going on is that I'd get on sales calls, and instead of selling, people would already be excited and ready to work with me. They just wanted to like, get in the calendar. And so it just took a lot of time and energy. It gave me a lot of time and energy back, because I didn't have to sell. The website became kind of my top sales employee, which, as a self-employed person, if you can kind of outsource the sales to somebody who will do it for free, AKA your website, I'll take it. So that's kind of how things unfolded for me.
Yeah, I love that journey of realizing like this is something that people need. Like there's people that can help them with copy, there's people that can help them with web design. But you're right, there's not a ton of people that do both, and they have to work together.
Yes.
Just like a book. Like I think about like when the books you read to your kids, like the story and the pictures have to go together, and your website is the same way.
Yes. Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, when you're looking on the internet, like it's all too often, even people that are really familiar with StoryBrand, and I'll do a website audit or do a review, and there's so often a disconnect between what's being said in the words and what's being said with the visuals. There's a total disconnect, and somebody might not pick that up if they're viewing this site, but they'll feel it. They'll feel it on maybe on an unconscious level. And so it's incredibly important.
Yeah. I'm curious from your background, having worked with Nike and Adidas and serving product-based businesses. I know you and I chatted a little bit before we hit record that I'm similar. If I have a professional background with a product-based business, but now serve a lot of service-based businesses. How did you make that shift into that niche? And why is it that serving female-led businesses is so important to you?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, for so many reasons. For me, making that shift was really organic because I understand that type of entrepreneur because I am one. And so it like deep in my soul, the freedom that I gain from being self-employed and being able to call my own shots and make my own schedule. Um, I it feels so good to me that I want that for anybody else who wants that for themselves. And I want to
Yeah.
help them get there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally align with that. I know when I became an entrepreneur, and I was like reluctant to call myself an entrepreneur for a long time or even a business owner. It was like, well, I just want to do something that helps other working moms, but I don't really know what that is. And so, like, as my journey went along, it was like, I want to help them have a schedule and freedom that they can go to the field trip and work and do something that they love and are passionate about, because
Right.
we should be able to do both. And it's
Mhm.
hard to do both in the corporate world for sure.
It's really hard, especially when you become a mom. It's
Hmm.
really hard. And it's such a gift as a mom if you can be self-employed because you just got to have that flexibility.
Yeah. Although I will, so my son thinks that I do nothing all day. He's definitely like, he just started second grade, and he's definitely said, it's no fair that you get to just stay home all day. And I was like, well, I do work. And then last night it was, well, mommy, you tell me that I shouldn't have too much screen time, and your work is just looking at the screen all day. I was like, I know, you're 8. You don't quite understand.
You're like, I'm not really watching movies all day or playing
Right.
video.
I'm not playing Pokemon. Like, I'm thinking and creating and working and selling and doing all these things,
Oh
but
my
that's
God.
besides the point. Well, it's funny, you were talking about your client Elise and how she tried to write her own copy. And I think a lot of people are like, oh yeah, like I can just write the copy. It's no big deal. And then
Yeah.
they sit down to do it, and it's really a bigger deal than they thought. Why do you think, or what are some common mistakes maybe that business owners make when they are trying to write their own copy?
Well, I'll start by sharing. I'll start by letting everybody off the hook who tries to write their own copy. And there's a thing called that I call, I guess, the bottle effect. And essentially, the bottle effect is as business owners, we are really inside of a bottle and we're trying to read the label that can only be read from outside the bottle. So that's why it's so hard. It's because you don't have the perspective that you need to really write about what you do with fresh eyes and a fresh mind. And also, what happens is the curse of knowledge, which is really that you get so ingrained and familiar with the work that you do that you forget what it's like to not know what you know. And so we end up using language and words and overwhelming our readers or whoever comes to visit our site, overwhelming them with too much information. And they have to work too hard to understand what we're saying. And so they leave our website. And it's really an unfortunate thing. I think that um, it's an unfortunate thing. It's super common. But I think a lot of people struggle with it so much and they think that something is wrong with them or that they should be able to do it. And I just want to say that it's really hard because it's your own business and you're just too close to it. I
Yeah.
think
And I
that,
think too,
yeah,
like I can see with clients a lot of times, like when we'll go over creative for social or whatever, and I'll show them something and they're like, this isn't quite it. And I'm like, you're not the customer. Like, let's go back to what your customer needs, because you are the expert and your
right,
customer is not. That's
right,
why they're hiring you. And I think so many people, like, we believe this lie that we have to come across as the expert,
right,
but if it's so expert that they don't get it, they're not going to consume the content. They're going to bounce.
right. 100%, 100%. And I think if I, you asked, if there is a common mistake that happens, I think just generally struggling with your own copy is the most common mistake. And forcing yourself to do it and having that on the to-do list, and then just it never leaves the to-do list because it moves to the bottom of the to-do list every day. The other thing that happens is people think that cloud-based builders, whether it be Squarespace or Wix or any of those, which I'm honestly a big fan of, like I think cloud builders are fantastic because they're very intuitive. But sites like that, or builders like that, website builders like that, they are in the business of brochure websites. So the templates are there to be beautiful, but they're not there to be high converting. And so what a lot of people do is they're like, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm, signing up for Squarespace, and then they spoon feed you a template that's really meant to be more of a brochure rather than a sales tool. And so you kind of fill in, they give you a paragraph here, a headline here, a button here, and you kind of just do what they tell you, thinking that they know what they're doing. They're in the business of being a website builder, right? But again, it's not that there's anything wrong with the builder. It's just the templates that they provide, and they want it to be easy for you. But really your website should be so much more effective and powerful for you than just a, kind of a bump on a log brochure website.
And I can imagine that for business owners who have maybe invested a lot of into their design, whether it's time or money or both, that it can be hard to hear like, your website isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Well, and you can tell them that, but they know it, already, because if your calendar isn't getting booked out with calls, or your course isn't selling, or whatever it is that you want the website to do for you, if that is not happening on autopilot, then it's not working for you. And we all know, I think we all fundamentally know, is that when you have real estate online, it should be working for you. It should be effective. And I think it can be a real disappointment to, build your own website in Wix, and then a year goes by and you think back and you're like, not one person has actually come from the website. All the people that I'm working with are coming from referrals. And again, nothing wrong with referrals, but it's really hard to build a reliable business on only referrals, because you can't, it changes month to month and you can't really count on it.
Yeah, that's so true. And I hear a lot of business owners who will, when we talk about social media, that they'll say like, well, I don't get any clients from social, I get them from referrals. Like, okay, but when somebody refers you and that client gets a referral from another person, where are they going? They're going to your website and they're going to your social media.
Yes.
So are those tools nurturing that relationship so that the referral actually converts?
100%. They don't have to be a cold referral to be valid. It can be, a lot of people have like just their website or their social is strictly for warm leads, but they're converting those warm leads over and over and over again.
Yeah, for sure. So, you said earlier that outsourcing to a copywriter can sometimes feel like a disconnect because they don't get your voice, they don't get some of the nuance. What does your collaborative process do to kind of combat that? And what does that 2.5-hour process look like so that we get those results we're actually looking for?
Yeah. Well, I'll walk you through the process. So essentially, I think most business owners end up kind of in that pickle of, I want to outsource my copy because it feels like torture to write it myself. But the person I'm going to hire to write my copy, they charge $5,000 or $10,000 for one sales page, and I don't have the budget for it. And a lot of people come to me and say, I've already hired a copywriter, and I spent so much time going back and forth with changes and corrections that it actually took me more time than it would have to write it myself than it would have to write it myself. And so that just often doesn't feel right. And then of course, writing it yourself is just daunting. It's like the homework project that just never goes away. And
Yes.
so because I've been doing this for so long, I figured out a way to streamline the process. And I think that the reason I can always promise it will be done in 2.5 hours flat is because it works. Like I've proven it over and over again. And the reality is I know my clients so well. They're spread too thin. They're spinning multiple plates and they don't have the time to deal with the copy. And not only that, if they did have the time, they don't have the time to learn how to write really high converting strategic copy. So essentially, the process begins with me extracting the gold from their brain. And that involves asking the right questions. And I like to say the metaphor for this I use is we all have so much information in our brain. Our story is inside of us. Our high converting, compelling story is inside of us, but we're too close to it. And there's so many other things going on in our brain. It's kind of like if you imagine a garage full of like crap, your garage is stuffed full with just a bunch of stuff, right? And so in order to clean out that garage, you have to empty everything out. And what I like to do is through my process, you empty everything out, and then I get to go through the piles of stuff and pick out the treasures that I know are the essential components of your story. So
Yeah.
that is step one, is just extracting that story from inside of your brain. And then because I've pulled all that out of you, I can write your copy for you. So I can get an essence of who you are, the nuances of your industry. It's all kind of done in that phase one that I pull everything out. I have everything I need to write your high converting sales page or your high converting homepage. And so I do that for you, so you don't have to do it. I mean, I think so many courses and services out there end up, showing you how to do it, but then you still have to do it yourself. And this process is a done for you service. So
I'm curious, would you consider it a done for you, or would you consider it a done with you?
well, the writing part is done for you, so you don't have to do it, right? I extract that gold from your brain, then I write it for you. And then the most important part of the process is step 3, where we apply your voice and infuse the nuances of your industry. So that's when you and this is the done with you part of it, where you and I get on a 90-minute call together. So we have plenty of time. I walk you through the entire sales page, and you get to understand the why and the strategy behind every word that's on the page. And then if there's anything that doesn't feel fully aligned, we tweak it, refine it until it just feels completely perfect. And the page is a long format page, so it's comprehensive in that when people land on the page, it will provide them all the information that they need in order to click on that call to action. They won't have to bounce around to multiple pages. I think it's much more intuitive for people to scroll down on, whether they're on a phone or a computer, scroll down the page versus bouncing from page to page. So we make it easy for them to gather the information they need to feel confident about booking that call with you or purchasing your course. So we do that together, and then you basically have, similar to like an architectural blueprint, a blueprint that would be created before you build a house. This is a blueprint for your website. So you've got all the words, you've got the font size, you've got the hierarchy, the flow, all the detail within this, what I call a wireframe. And it's just like a blueprint. And then you copy that over to your website. So it's just a simple copy and paste over to your website. My team can do that for you too if you just don't want to deal with it. So we get that copy over to your website. And then I put on my design hat. And when the page is ready to go live, I go through and review it, and I make sure that that visual story that's being told is aligned with the written story that we've crafted. And so we talk about photography, we talk about palette, we talk about fonts, we talk about flow and hierarchy, and how to get this message really absorbed in a quick amount of time. Because the reality is people don't really read websites anymore. They scan them. So we have to write it and design it in a way that it can be digested as it's scanned.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that people don't really read websites anymore, because I've heard people say like, well, then why do you write all this copy if people don't really read websites? But some people do, and you can use that copy in other places.
Yeah, well, the thing is, people read websites. Let me put it this way. They scan websites. So if you write it in a way that it can be digested as it's being scanned, it will get absorbed. If you write long bodies of copy that require a lot of brain energy to digest, it won't get read. So the way around that is to use like shorter bits of copy, pair them with icons. Bullet points are your best friend. So people are going to read it and digest it. It just has to be designed in the right way, and the fonts have to be just right in the flow. Yeah. And then essentially after you've made sure that the design is aligned with the written story, then you just literally turn on that client getting faucet. And then that just keeps working month after month after month.
Yes, client getting faucet. We all want that. That is 100%. We all want that. I love that.
Yeah.
So if somebody is thinking about like, okay, maybe I am ready to invest, I'm curious, where do you start? Do you start with a sales page for a specific offer, or do you like to start with a home page, or is it like, no, you got to do it all at once? What do you recommend?
I believe every self-employed business owner needs one page on their website that sells for them, that just acts as their top sales employee. And during our initial call, we'll decide if you need it specifically for a sales page or if you need it for a home page. But it becomes always very clear to me which one you need, depending on what your goals are and what's happening with your business. So it really depends.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's one of the things that like I see people get stuck in the internet world of like, well, such and such person said I need this. This is the one thing I need and it's going to change my business. Like, well, it's not always one thing. Or if it is one thing, your one thing is different from somebody else's one thing. So it's important to have that strategy conversation and determine for your unique business, your bandwidth, your goals, your brand, what's the thing that is going to be the biggest needle mover, and work on that first.
Exactly. What is going to bring income into your world? And that becomes really clear during that first conversation.
Yeah, for sure. So before we wrap up, I do have a couple questions that I want to ask you to get to know you. This has been such an enlightening conversation, and I'm sure all of our listeners are like, oh my gosh, I want to go redo my whole website, and I'm going to hire Kris to do it. But before we wrap up and they can find out where to connect with you and learn how to do that, I have a couple questions that I want to ask that we always ask our listeners just to get to know them a little bit better. And we talk a lot about brand values around here. And I would love to know, what is one of your brand values and how did you land on that?
Well, I think it goes back to that freedom for sure. I think freedom is probably one of my biggest values, and that has just been inside of me my whole life. So it's not really something that I landed on. I just know that the more freedom that I have, the better that I feel. And that doesn't mean that like, I think freedom is really working on your own terms. It doesn't mean that I don't like work a lot some weeks. but I like being able to be in control of my time and my schedule. And I think the other value I would share is just less is more. That also just, it feels good to me when, you know, I'm in an environment, whether it's a physical environment or an online environment, that's just curated and streamlined for me and thoughtfully done. There's a letter, I want to say one of the early presidents, I don't know if it was Lincoln or who it was. I have to Google that and find out, but he wrote this letter and he said, "I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time." And I love that phrase because it does take extra energy to streamline and simplify your messaging and your design, but it's so worth it because the person on the other end feels the difference between you
Yes.
and somebody else who hasn't taken the time to do that.
Yeah, a curated collection is worth so much more than all the things,
Right.
because then you're right, the person on the other end isn't expending the energy. And that's so interesting you say that. I remember from when I was in my corporate days and we were talking about website navigation and the idea of shop all. And I was like, nobody clicks shop all. It's too much. It's
Right.
overwhelming. Like maybe the 1% super fan that shops your website all the time. But if you are a product-based business, like curated collections and
Yes,
navigation.
totally. Yeah. I mean, our brains are really wired to survive and thrive. So when we come up against something that's going to expend a lot of brain energy for us, we will bail 100% of the time.
Yes.
It's just too much energy, too much work. It's not going to be the quickest path for us to thrive.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I heard something on a podcast recently that was talking about that people are exposed to more information today in 24 hours than people were 100 years ago in their entire lives.
No.
And so it's like our
No.
brains are just are
Yeah.
being overloaded. And so and also coming from the corporate space and working in even like physical stores, I remember us talking about like, well, people don't read. They don't read the signs. Well, it's not because they don't want to. It's because their brains are just like full. They're
Right.
processing a
Right.
lot.
Right. No, it's so true. It's so
Yeah,
true.
so
Yeah.
making it easier for people. Well,
Yeah.
speaking of reading things and things that we do
Yeah.
want to consume, I will have to ask, one of my brand values is personal development. And so I always love to ask our guests, what is your favorite either personal development book or podcast, or if you're like me and cannot pick a favorite, something that you've read or listened to recently that you really love?
Well, I'm a big fan of the Marketing Made Simple podcast because I think they do a great job of just reminding us what's essential. It can be really easy to chase shiny objects and get on Instagram and kind of everybody has their different solution, to your point earlier. And it's easy to waste money and time with shiny objects. And I think the Marketing Made Simple is a way to ground and remind yourself what are the essentials of an incredible, powerful business, and just
Yeah.
keep plugging away at that. And then I think, of course, the book that I think is probably the most helpful as far as business related is Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. From a personal standpoint, like self-improvement, oh my gosh, I really love the Life Coach School podcast.
Hmm.
And I also love Jody Moore. Like, I think those guys, just the thought work around not believing your own thoughts and being intentional, how to kind of unravel
Hmm.
from being so close to your own thoughts. It's similar, I guess, to what we talked about, but I think those are the things that really have impacted my life.
Yeah, I love that. The Story Brand book I loved, but I loved Marketing Made Simple, the book. And that's always my go-to recommendation of like that book. Just, it was like a light bulb turned on when I read that.
Mhm.
The way that they put the
Yeah.
things that you could actually understand. And
Yeah.
it's, like you said, the foundational things. And I even think about it from an athlete perspective. Like if you have the super fancy equipment or the expensive this or that, it doesn't matter if you don't also have the foundational pieces in place first.
Totally.
And with
Right.
your business, those foundational things are sometimes boring. And so we want to gloss over them and get to
Right.
the like trendy, fun stuff. But if we don't
Right.
have the foundational stuff in place, then building a sustainable business is going to be really challenging.
And I think a lot of people can spend a lot of energy trying to figure out what tool, whether it's like what web builder, is it Kajabi, is it, which email platform. And people can kind of think, oh, the answer is in the tool that you choose. And it's totally not. All of them are
Mm-hmm.
perfectly capable of doing the job that you need them to do. I liken this to like when people look at the Mona Lisa or a Van Gogh, they don't say, what brand of canvas did he paint that on? It doesn't matter. It's
Yes.
your masterpiece is out in the world on the World Wide Web. It doesn't matter where it's built or what email client you're using, as long as you're using it.
Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so true. I love that. Well, speaking of using those things, my last question is to ask something that you are really consistent with, either in your business or in your personal life, that you are really proud of. And I will remind all of our listeners, as well as you, what I teach is that consistent doesn't have to mean constant. So something that you are consistent with.
The big thing for me is calendaring, so time blocking on my calendar. It took me a while to get into the groove with it, but now on Sundays I really try to take the time. If I don't do it on Sunday, I do it on Monday, just to plan out the week and give myself some margin and breathing room in between items, and just I color code things. So the whole calendaring thing really works for me. And so I keep doing it over and over. The other thing that I would like to share, because I'm so excited about it, is that I am on day 8 of giving up sugar and flour. And
Oh,
I am feeling so great about it.
really?
Hmm. Yeah.
That is inspiring and also sounds incredibly challenging. So good
It's
for
not
you.
it's not as hard as I thought it would be.
Hmm.
I have a 5.5-year-old, and so um I feel like in hindsight I've been using food to kind of comfort me through the challenging parts of parenting for 5.5
Hmm.
years. And I am finally making this change, and it just feels like a kind of a gift to myself to be doing
Yeah,
it. And
that's awesome.
yeah. Yeah.
W-
So
I
those are
love
the
it. And I love that you use the word calendaring. I used to always say calendarize, and my team was like, Ruthie, that's not a word. I'm like, yes, it is. We're going to calendarize it. We're going to put it on the calendar.
I like that better, actually. I'm going to use that.
Yes, I was always all about calendarize. So that's so
It's
funny.
it sounds like a superpower of some sort.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Well, Kris, thank you so much again for being here and sharing your wisdom and insights with our listeners. If they are interested in learning more and connecting with you, where do you hang out online, and where can they find out more?
Yeah, the best way to connect with me is just to go to my website, reddoordesigns.com. That's reddoordesigns.com, reddoordesigns.com. You can find everything that I do there. The great part about the website is that you can get my freebie, which is how to write compelling copy in 5 minutes flat. And it's a really simple 5-minute tutorial video and a little bit of a worksheet that you can use again and again and again if you're writing your own copy. And then also my copy that sells in 2.5 hours flat offer is there too. And so pretty much everything is there. On Instagram, I'm at Red Door Design with no S at the end.
Awesome. We will link all of that in the show notes. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Ruthie.